The auctioneer's hammer hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and Caleb Mercer watched a woman's dignity being sold for the price of a lame horse. She stood on that platform with her swollen belly and trembling daughter, eyes fixed on some distant horizon only she could see, while the town that claimed to be civilized turned their backs and counted their coins. In that single burning moment, Caleb made a choice that would shatter every comfortable lie the West had ever told itself about mercy, honor, and what it truly means to be human. Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened next didn't just shock the town. It changed the definition of redemption itself. And when you reach the final moment, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city name so I can see just how far this truth has traveled. The dust never settled in Salvation Creek. It hung in the air like judgment itself, coating everything in the same tired shade of brown: the buildings, the horses, the people. Especially the people. Caleb Mercer had learned that particular truth the hard way, watching 3 years of his life turn to dust right along with his cattle, his crops, and finally his wife's grave marker that he could barely afford to carve her name into. He hadn't meant to come to town that day. Hell, he hadn't meant to come to town at all anymore. The ranch, what was left of it, sat 12 miles northeast, far enough that he could pretend civilization didn't exist, close enough that the silence sometimes felt like drowning. But the well pump had finally given up its ghost, and even a man intent on disappearing still needed water. The mercantile was his only stop. Get the parts, get out, get back to the nothing that passed for his life now. Simple, clean. No human contact beyond the transaction. But Salvation Creek had other plans. The crowd had gathered in the town square like iron filings to a magnet, that particular kind of gathering that pretended to be accidental, but was anything but. Caleb recognized the shape of it immediately. He'd seen it before, back when the town had gathered to discuss whether the Henderson family should be run out for harboring their half-Comanche grandson. The righteous cruelty of good people was always the worst kind. He should have walked past, should have kept his head down, collected his pump parts, and left these people to whatever fresh hell they were creating for themselves. Should have remembered that getting involved in other people's nightmares was how you ended up with nightmares of your own. Instead, he heard the auctioneer's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a rusty saw. And the child comes with, of course. 7 years old, healthy enough, knows her letters. Caleb stopped walking. The platform that usually held farm equipment and livestock had been repurposed, standing center stage because that's what it was, a stage. A performance of civic duty and Christian charity, was a woman. Young, maybe 25, though life had clearly tried to make her older. Her dress was clean but worn thin, the kind of clean that spoke of pride even when pride was all you had left. Her belly swelled obvious and undeniable beneath the faded fabric. Beside her, pressed close to her mother's skirts, stood a little girl with dark braids and eyes too old for her face. "Current bid stands at $12, the auctioneer continued, his voice carrying that false brightness of a man doing distasteful work and pretending it was noble. $12 for the assumption of debt, care, and keep. The woman is in good health. The child is well-mannered. The estate of the late... This is a disgrace." The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, female, sharp, with that particular indignation that demanded to be heard, but not to actually do anything. "A necessary resolution to unfortunate circumstances, Mrs. Patterson," the auctioneer replied smoothly. He'd clearly prepared for objections. "The deceased left debts amounting to $47. The boarding house where Mrs. Ward and her daughter have been residing has requested compensation. The church has done what it can, but nothing justifies this," another voice interrupted. Male this time. Caleb recognized it. Martin Hughes, the banker, a man who'd forfeited 3 ranches in the past 2 years and slept fine every night. "This is 1867, not the Dark Ages. We don't sell people." "We're not selling people," the auctioneer said, and Caleb could hear the rehearsed patience in every syllable. "We're arranging for the settlement of debt and the provision of care for a widow and orphan who otherwise have no means of support. If you prefer to take on the financial responsibility yourself, Mr. Hughes..." The banker's objection died in his throat. Caleb watched the woman on the platform. She hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. Her eyes remained fixed on that distant point beyond the crowd, beyond the town, beyond the whole damned situation. The little girl, though, she was looking at the faces below, searching them, looking for one that might hold something other than pity or disgust or that worst of all human expressions, uncomfortable relief that this wasn't happening to them. "Do I hear 15?" the auctioneer called. Silence. The crowd shifted, boots scraping dirt, someone coughing. A baby cried somewhere on the periphery. The ordinary sounds of life continuing while dignity died in the afternoon sun. Caleb's fingers tightened on the list of pump parts in his pocket. "Not my problem. Not my business. I came here for metal and rubber, not for—" "The child's father was a good man," someone murmured nearby. Caleb glanced over. Two women, standing close, voices lowered but not low enough. "Died in the war. She married his brother after, which was proper enough, but then he went and got himself killed in a logging accident 6 months back. Left nothing but debts and that baby she's carrying. Should have thought about that before Before what? Before her husband died? Before she needed to eat? I'm just saying, there are charitable institutions. Not out here there aren't, and you know it." The auctioneer's voice rose again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're trying to resolve this matter with dignity." A sound erupted from the crowd. Not quite laughter, not quite a scoff, just noise. The kind of noise that said everyone here knew exactly what this was, knew it was wrong, and were going to allow it anyway because the alternative meant opening their own wallets or their own homes. $12 going once. The woman's hand moved, just slightly, down to her daughter's head, smoothing dark hair that didn't need smoothing. The gesture was so automatic, so inherently protective, that Caleb felt something crack in his chest. Some piece of scar tissue that had been holding together for 3 years suddenly giving way. He thought of Sarah, of the baby they'd lost, of the second baby that had taken Sarah with it, of standing alone in a cemetery while the same goddamn town that was now averting its eyes had murmured the same goddamn platitudes about necessary circumstances and unfortunate situations. Going twice? The little girl's eyes found his, direct, unflinching, 7 years old and already learning that the world was a place that watched you drown and called it mercy. Caleb's mouth opened. The words came out before his brain could stop them. $100. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the baby stopped crying. Every head turned. The auctioneer actually took a step back, hammer forgotten mid-swing. Caleb walked forward. The crowd parted like he was carrying plague, which maybe he was. The plague of actually doing something instead of just talking about how terrible it was that something needed to be done. "I said $100. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. He'd barely spoken to another human being in months. Rusty, rough, but loud enough. "That enough to settle the debt and whatever else needs settling?" The auctioneer's face cycled through several expressions, landing on cautious relief. "Sir, that's more than generous, but this is a serious commitment. You understand you'd be taking responsibility for—" "I understand I'm buying my way out of watching this continue." Caleb pulled the money from his pocket. Not his money, really, the emergency fund Sarah had insisted they keep. Blood money now, in more ways than one. He counted out bills onto the platform edge. "That cover it?" "Well beyond, Mr. Mercer, Caleb Mercer." Recognition flickered in the auctioneer's eyes. Of course. The hermit rancher. The one who'd lost everything. The one who didn't come to town anymore. The one who was supposed to be safely broken and therefore not a problem. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate the gesture, but perhaps you should take a moment to consider." "I'm not interested in considering." Caleb's eyes finally rose to the platform, to the woman. She was looking at him now, really looking, and what he saw in her face wasn't gratitude. It was calculation, assessment. The look of someone trying to determine if she'd just been moved from one cage to another. "I'm interested in ending this spectacle. Are we done here?" The auctioneer looked to the crowd, to the banker, to the sheriff who'd been standing silent at the back. No help came from any quarter. They were too busy being shocked, being relieved, being scandalized, being anything except helpful. Yes, I suppose we are. If there are no other bids—" He paused, hopeful. No one spoke. "Then I declare this matter settled. Mr. Mercer assumes all debts and responsibilities pertaining to Mrs. Elena Ward and her daughter, Ivy Ward, as of this date. May Providence smile upon this arrangement. Providence had its chance. Caleb gathered the remaining bills, then looked up at the platform again. At Elena. At Ivy. You have belongings somewhere? Elena's voice, when it came, was quiet, but steel reinforced. At the boarding house. We'll collect them. I'm sure you can do a lot of things, Mrs. Ward. Caleb cut her off, but gently. Right now, what you're going to do is get down from that platform and walk away from these people with your head up. You can hate me later if you want, but you're done being their entertainment. Something flickered in her eyes. Still not gratitude, not trust, but maybe, just maybe, the smallest recognition that he'd meant what he said. The little girl, Ivy, moved first. She stepped to the platform edge, and Caleb reached up without thinking, lifting her down. She was lighter than she should be, too light. He set her on the ground carefully, and she immediately pressed back against her mother's skirts as Elena descended the stairs on her own, refusing any offered hand. The crowd stayed silent, watching, always watching. Caleb met a few eyes as he turned. The banker looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Patterson looked scandalized. The sheriff looked carefully neutral. The rest just looked away. Mr. Mercer. The auctioneer's voice followed them. The papers will need to be, bring them to the ranch, 12 miles northeast. You know the one. Caleb didn't stop walking. Elena fell into step beside him, one hand on Ivy's shoulder, the other supporting her belly. Or burn them, I don't particularly care. The walk to the boarding house took 10 minutes. Elena didn't speak. Ivy didn't speak. Caleb didn't speak. What was there to say? The transaction was complete. The crowd would talk for weeks, and none of it mattered because the moment he'd opened his mouth in that square, he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The boarding house was exactly what he'd expected. Shabby genteel, the kind of place that took in people with nowhere else to go and made them pay for the privilege of being reminded of that fact. The landlady met them at the door, a woman whose face had settled into permanent disapproval sometime around her 40th birthday. Mrs. Ward, I see you've resolved your situation. I'll collect our things. Elena's voice was flat. If you'll excuse me. Of course. The landlady stepped aside, but her eyes went to Caleb. Mr. Mercer, isn't it? I knew your wife, sweet girl, such a tragedy. Yes. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't justify. Just stood in the doorway and waited. Elena returned within minutes. 2 carpet bags, worn but serviceable. A small bundle wrapped in cloth. That was it. That was everything they owned in the world. A woman, a child, a coming baby, and 3 pieces of luggage. I'll carry those, Caleb said. I'm capable. I know you are. I'm carrying them anyway. Elena studied him for a long moment, then handed over the bags. Thank you, Mrs. Brennan, she said to the landlady, and Caleb heard the effort it took to keep her voice civil. For your hospitality. Yes, well. Mrs. Brennan's discomfort was palpable. I hope this arrangement works out for you. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I hope you know what you're doing. I hope you don't regret this. I hope you're not making the mistake everyone thinks you're making. Caleb turned without responding and headed for his wagon. It was parked behind the mercantile, the bed already loaded with the pump parts he'd come for. He set the carpet bags beside them, then helped Ivy up onto the bench seat. Elena climbed up on her own, her movements careful, protective of the life she carried. He took the reins, clicked his tongue. The horses moved forward. Salvation Creek disappeared behind them in a cloud of dust and unspoken judgment. The silence stretched for miles. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. Elena kept her eyes on the horizon. Ivy sat between them, small hands folded in her lap, looking at everything and nothing. It was Ivy who finally broke the quiet. Are you mean? Caleb glanced down at her. Those 2 old eyes were fixed on him now, direct and unblinking. Sometimes, he said. Are you? Mama says I shouldn't be. Your mama's probably right. But sometimes I am anyway. Yeah, Caleb said. Me too. Ivy considered this. Mama says we're going to your house. Ranch, and yes. Is it nice? No. Elena made a small sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, just air escaping from somewhere deep. At least you're honest. Lying seems like wasted effort at this point. Caleb guided the horses around a rut in the road. The house is standing. The roof doesn't leak much. There's a well, a barn, some land. It's not nice, but it's shelter. And in exchange, Elena's voice was careful. What exactly are you expecting in exchange, Mr. Mercer? The question he'd been waiting for, the question she had every right to ask. Nothing you're thinking, he said. I need a housekeeper about as much as I need a third boot. I eat once a day, I sleep in the barn most nights anyway, and I don't have company, ever. As for the other, he kept his eyes on the road, kept his voice level. I'm not interested. Not in you, not in anyone. That part of my life is done. People say things. People say a lot of things. Most of it's noise. He did look at her then, just briefly. You want to know what I'm expecting? I'm expecting you'll heal up, have that baby, get your feet under you, and leave as soon as you're able. I'm expecting you'll hate the isolation and the work and the fact that I'm not good company. I'm expecting this arrangement to last maybe 3 months, probably less, and then you'll move on to somewhere better. Anywhere's better than an auction block, and anywhere's better than my ranch. Elena stared at him. Then why? Because I could. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Because everyone else in that square had the same $100 in their pockets or their banks, and they chose to watch instead. Because I'm tired of watching. Because... He stopped, started again. Because my wife's name was Sarah, and she died 2 years ago giving birth to a son who died with her. And I stood in front of a different crowd while they said different words that meant the same damn thing. That sometimes people die and it's tragic, but it's also just life. And we all move on and forget and pretend we did something noble by witnessing. The silence that followed was different. Heavier, true. I'm sorry, Elena said quietly. For your loss. Yeah, me too. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. I'm not saving you. I'm not rescuing you. I'm not your hero or your husband or your anything. I'm a man who had money in his pocket and got tired of being a coward. That's all this is. That's not nothing, Elena said. It's not much either. Ivy's small voice piped up again. I think it's something. Caleb looked down at her. She was still watching him with those serious eyes, and for the first time he saw something in them besides calculation. Something almost like hope, which was the most dangerous thing of all. We'll see, he said. The ranch appeared as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Caleb saw it through Elena's eyes and hated what he saw. The sagging fence, the overgrown yard, the house that needed paint, and probably needed prayer. The barn was in better shape, ironically, since that's where he spent most of his time, but the house... I know it's not... It has walls and a roof, Elena interrupted. That's more than we had this morning. He pulled the wagon up to the house and climbed down, then helped Ivy to the ground. Elena descended on her own again, that same careful independence. Caleb grabbed the carpetbags and the bundle, then kicked open the front door. It stuck. It always stuck. Inside was worse than outside. Dust covered everything. Cobwebs hung in corners. The furniture was spare and what existed was worn. He'd taken Sarah's things, her curtains, her quilts, her little touches that had made the place a home, and packed them away in the attic, because looking at them had been like swallowing glass. I'll sleep in the barn, he said into the silence. House is yours, all of it. There's a bedroom through there. He gestured to the door on the left. And a smaller room there for the girl. Kitchen's functional if you're not particular. Pantry's got some basics. Well's out back. Elena set her hand on the back of the single chair at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the dusty wood. You're giving us your house. I'm giving you shelter. Not the same thing. Where will you sit? Barn's got a room. It's where I sleep most nights anyway. He set the bags down. I'll bring in some firewood. Nights get cold even in summer. You'll want to... Mr. Mercer. Elena turned to face him fully. Why are you doing this? I already told you, but no, not why you bought us. Why you're doing this. Giving us the house. Asking for nothing. Expecting us to leave. Why? Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman trying to find the catch, the trap, the hidden price, because there was always a price. Life had taught her that, the same way it had taught him. Because I can't stand to take anything else from anyone, he said. I already took everything from Sarah, her life, her dreams, her future. I'm not taking from you too. You need a place to land, I've got one. You need time to figure out what's next. Take it. But I'm not adding to your debts, Mrs. Ward. You don't owe me. Not affection, not service, not anything. The only thing I'm expecting is for you to survive. Everything else is your choice. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie. He let her look. There was nothing to hide anymore. You couldn't hide from someone when you'd already shown them the worst version of yourself standing in a town square buying human beings. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Okay. Ivy had wandered to the window and was looking out at the vast expanse of scrubland and sky. There's nothing here, she said, not accusingly, just observing. No, Caleb agreed. There's not. I like it. Elena made that sound again, almost laugh, almost sob. Ivy, it's quiet, the little girl continued. In town, everybody's always talking, always looking, always... She paused, searching for the word. Always there. Here there's nobody. Just us, Caleb said. Just us, Ivy repeated, and smiled. It was the first smile he'd seen from either of them, small, fragile, but real. It made her look like the 7-year-old she was instead of the old soul she'd been forced to become. I'll get that firewood, Caleb said, and escaped to the barn before anyone could say anything else that might crack open the careful numbness he'd built around himself. The barn was his sanctuary, his punishment, his penance. He'd built it with his own hands in those first hopeful years, when Sarah was alive and they'd talked about cattle and horses and children who would grow up running through these fields. Now it housed ghosts and one aging gelding who'd been too old to sell and too loyal to abandon. He loaded his arms with split wood and carried it back to the house. Elena had opened the windows. Fresh air was chasing out 3 years of stale grief. She'd found a broom somewhere, probably brought it herself, and was sweeping the kitchen floor while Ivy explored the bedrooms. There's a pump in the kitchen, Caleb said, setting the wood by the fireplace. Water's clean. Outhouse is behind the barn. It needs some maintenance, but it functions. I'll work on that tomorrow. You don't have to. I have to do something with my time. Might as well be useful. He straightened, brushed bark from his shirt. I'll leave you to settle in. If you need anything, I'll be... In the barn. Elena leaned on the broom. You've said. Right. Mr. Mercer? She waited until he looked at her. Thank you. I know you said you're not saving us, but... Thank you anyway. He nodded. Words felt stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. He left before he had to find them. The sun was fully down by the time he reached the barn. The gelding, General, named by Sarah in a fit of romantic nostalgia, nickered a greeting. Caleb fed him, checked his water, then climbed the ladder to the loft where he'd made his sleeping space. A bedroll, a lantern, a box of books he never read anymore. Everything a man needed to exist without living. Through the loft's small window, he could see the house. Light glowed in the kitchen window, then in the bedroom window. Then the smaller room where Ivy would sleep. Life returning to spaces that had been dead for so long. He'd meant what he'd said. He expected them to leave, expected Elena to realize that isolation and a broken rancher were not an improvement over town judgment, expected her to find a better situation, a better life, a better everything. But for tonight, for this moment, there was light in his dead house. There was a child's laugh drifting across the yard as Ivy discovered something, a doll maybe, left behind from before. There was the sound of life. Caleb lay down on his bedroll and stared at the barn's ceiling beams. What the hell had he done? Not saved anyone, he knew that. Couldn't save what was already broken, including himself. But maybe, for a few weeks or months, he'd given 2 people a place to breathe, a place to land, a place to be nothing except alive. It wasn't heroic, it wasn't noble, It was just the bare minimum of human decency that everyone else in Salvation Creek had decided was too expensive. Outside, the night sounds began. Crickets, coyotes, wind through grass. The same sounds that had kept him company for 2 years. But tonight, beneath them, something new. The sound of shutters being secured. Of a woman singing quietly to her child. Of occupancy. Caleb closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring questions he didn't want to answer. Tomorrow would bring reality crashing back. Tomorrow would remind him that nothing good lasted. That every light eventually went out. That every hope turned to ash. But tonight, just for tonight, there was light in the windows. And that would have to be enough. Dawn came the way it always did on the ranch. Relentless and indifferent. Caleb woke to the same gray light filtering through the same gaps in the barn wall, his body protesting the same spots where the floorboards pressed against his spine. For a moment, in that space between sleep and consciousness, he forgot. Forgot about yesterday. Forgot about the auction. Forgot about the 2 lives he'd complicated by trying to simplify his conscience. Then he heard it. The creak of the house's back door, the splash of water from the pump, the soft murmur of a woman's voice telling her daughter to be careful, to not spill, to wash her face properly. Reality settled back onto his shoulders like a yoke. He descended the ladder slowly, his joints cracking in the cold morning air. General huffed expectantly from his stall, and Caleb fed him first. That routine at least remained unchanged. Then he stood in the barn doorway, looking across the yard at the house that was his but wasn't, trying to figure out what the hell came next. The answer presented itself in the form of Elena Ward emerging from the house carrying a bucket. She'd changed from yesterday's worn dress into something even simpler, a work dress, faded blue, with the sleeves already rolled up despite the morning chill. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She moved with purpose toward the chicken coop, which hadn't held chickens in 2 years. Caleb watched her discover that fact, watched her stand there for a moment, bucket in hand, staring at the empty roosts. Then she turned, and her eyes found him across the yard. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The distance between the barn and the house suddenly felt vast and unbridgeable. Finally, Elena set down the bucket and walked toward him. Not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. When she was close enough that they didn't have to shout, she stopped. The chicken coop is empty. Yes. When did you last keep chickens? 2 years? Maybe 3? He couldn't quite remember. Time had a way of blurring when you stopped marking it with anything except sunrise and sunset. I thought I could earn my keep. Cook, clean, tend animals. Her voice was matter of fact. But there's no animals to tend except that horse, and from what I can see, you've been cooking and cleaning for yourself just fine without help. I told you yesterday. I know what you told me. Elena crossed her arms, not defensive, just containing something. But I also know that nothing in this world is free, Mr. Mercer. Everything has a price. You paid $100 for us yesterday. That's not nothing. That's not charity. That's a transaction. So I'm trying to figure out what the terms are. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her in the morning light, at the shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night, at the way she held herself straight back despite the weight she carried, both in her belly and on her shoulders, at the fierce, tired determination in every line of her body. You want terms? He said. Here they are. You live in the house. I live in the barn. You take care of yourself and your daughter. I take care of the ranch. We stay out of each other's way. When you're ready to leave, you leave. That's it. That's all there is, Mrs. Ward. He turned back toward the barn. I'm not interested in complicating this. It's already complicated. Her voice followed him. You made it complicated the moment you opened your mouth in that town square. He stopped, turned. What do you want from me? An apology? Can't give you one. I'm not sorry I did it. Instructions? Don't have any. I don't know how this works any better than you do. A promise? I already told you. I expect you'll leave. That's the only honest thing I can offer. I don't want promises. Elena's hands dropped to her sides. I want to understand. Because the man who bought us yesterday looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. And the man who gave us his house looked like every act of kindness was killing him. And now you're standing here telling me to stay out of your way like we're an inconvenience you're trying to ignore. So which is it, Mr. Mercer? Are you helping us, or are you hiding from us? The question landed like a punch, accurate and unwelcome. Both, Caleb said finally. I'm doing both. Something shifted in Elena's expression. Not quite softness, but maybe recognition. The recognition of someone who understood that two truths could exist in the same space, contradicting each other, and both still real. All right, she said, then I'll make my own terms. I'll stay until I can repay the $100 you spent. I'll work for that repayment however I can, even if all I can do is keep the house from falling down around our ears. And when the debt is settled, I'll decide if I'm leaving or staying. Not you, me. Mrs. Ward, those are my terms, Mr. Mercer. You want to stay out of my way? Fine. But I won't be invisible, I won't be silent, and I won't be grateful for charity I didn't ask for, but I'll damn sure earn what was given. Her chin lifted. Do we have an agreement? Caleb studied her. This woman who'd stood on an auction block yesterday with nothing but dignity, who'd endured the worst of human nature with her head up, who now stood in his yard demanding the right to her own pride. Who was he to take that from her? We have an agreement. Good. Elena nodded once, sharp and final. Then she turned and walked back to the house, leaving Caleb standing in the barn doorway, wondering if he'd just won or lost something he couldn't name. The days that followed established a rhythm that felt less like living together and more like orbiting. Caleb rose with the sun, worked the land that stubbornly refused to yield much beyond scrub grass and regret, and returned to the barn when the light failed. Elena kept to the house, making it function through sheer force of will. They passed each other in the yard, at the well, in the spaces between. They nodded. Sometimes they spoke. Practical things. Necessary things. The weather. The well pump that still needed fixing. Whether Ivy could feed General an apple. Never anything more. Ivy existed in the spaces between her mother's fierce independence and Caleb's careful distance. She appeared and disappeared like a ghost, always watching, rarely speaking. Caleb would find her sitting on the corral fence, observing as he worked. Would catch her shadow following him to the barn. Would hear her small voice asking questions that seemed simple but weren't. Why don't you live in the house? Why doesn't General have friends? Why is the sky bigger here? He answered, when he could, because your mother needs space. Because I only kept one horse. It's not bigger, you can just see more of it. She seemed to accept these answers, filing them away in whatever internal catalog she was building of how the world worked when it wasn't actively trying to harm you. 3 days in, Caleb came back from checking the fence line to find Elena on the roof of the house. He stopped short, heart jumping into his throat. She was 7 months pregnant, balanced on a slope of old shingles, a hammer in one hand and a mouthful of nails. As he watched, she pulled one out, positioned it, and drove it home with 3 solid strikes. What the hell are you doing? Elena didn't startle, didn't look down, just positioned another nail. You said the roof leaks. I said it doesn't leak much. It leaked on Ivy's bed last night, so I'm fixing it. Another 3 strikes, another nail seated. I found shingles in the barn. They looked unused, so I brought them up. You climbed a ladder while pregnant. I've done harder things while pregnant. She did look at him then, shading her eyes against the sun. I appreciate the concern, Mr. Mercer, but I'm fine. You fall from there, you won't be. Then I won't fall. Caleb stood there, frustration warring with something else. Admiration, maybe, or fear, or the uncomfortable realization that this woman was going to do whatever she deemed necessary regardless of his objections, and he had absolutely no authority to stop her. At least let me hold the ladder steady. The ladder's fine. Mrs. Ward, I said the ladder's fine, Mr. Mercer. Her voice was patient but immovable. Go back to whatever you were doing. I'll be down when I'm done. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist, wanted to do something other than stand helplessly in the yard while a pregnant woman risked her neck fixing his neglected roof. But he could see in the set of her shoulders, in the efficient way she moved, that this wasn't about the roof at all. This was about control, about agency, about doing something, anything, that proved she wasn't just a burden waiting to be carried. So he held the ladder anyway, standing there in stubborn silence until she'd replaced every damaged shingle she could reach. When she finally descended, moving carefully, he caught her elbow at the last step. "I can manage." "I know you can." He steadied her anyway. "But you don't have to." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or just the acknowledgement that they were both trying to survive this strange arrangement in the only ways they knew how. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for holding the ladder. Thank you for fixing the roof." She nodded and went back inside, leaving Caleb standing there with his hand still warm from where it had touched her elbow. The fourth night, Caleb woke to crying. Not Ivy. The sound was too deep, too wrenching. He was out of the loft and across the yard before conscious thought caught up with his body. The house door was unlocked. He pushed through, following the sound to Elena's bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, doubled over, hands pressed to her belly. Ivy stood in the doorway in her nightgown, face white with fear. "What happened?" Caleb's voice came out harder than he meant. "Nothing." Elena's breath hitched. "It's nothing. Just—" Another wave hit her. She gasped, folding further. "That's not nothing." Caleb crossed to her. "How long has this been happening?" "An hour, maybe less. It's too early. It can't be—" Her words dissolved into a sob that was more fear than pain. Caleb's mind raced. 7 months. She was 7 months along. Too early, like she said. Too early and too far from town and too far from any help that mattered. "Ivy," he turned to the girl, "go to the kitchen. Fill a pot with water and put it on the stove. Can you do that?" Ivy nodded, wide-eyed, and ran. "Mrs. Ward, Elena, I need you to lie down." "I can't. It hurts more when I—" "I know. Do it anyway." He helped her shift back, the motion gentle despite his fear. "Has the baby moved?" "Yes. Just before the pain started. That's what woke me. He was—" She stopped, hand pressed hard to her side. "He's still moving. I can feel him. Not labor then. Or not full labor. Something else." Caleb had seen this once before, with Sarah. False labor, the doctor had called it. The body practicing for something it wasn't ready to complete. Sarah's false labor had stopped after a few hours. Sarah's real labor, 6 months later, had killed her. "Listen to me." He kept his voice level. "You're going to breathe, slow and steady. In through your nose, out through your mouth. When the pain comes, you don't fight it. You breathe through it. Understand?" "I've had a baby before, Mr. Mercer. I know how to—" Another wave. She gripped the bed frame hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Then show me." He pulled the quilt up over her legs. "Show me you can breathe through it." She did. Ragged at first, then steadier. In through her nose, out through her mouth. The wave passed. She sagged against the pillow, sweat beading her forehead. "How far to town?" she asked. 2 hours by wagon? More at night." "Then we wait." "Elena, we wait." Her eyes met his, terrified but determined. "If it gets worse, if something changes, then we go. But right now we wait. I won't risk the roads in the dark unless I have to." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to hitch up the wagon anyway, consequences be damned. But he could see the calculation in her eyes. The same calculation he'd make. Risk the rough roads and maybe bring on the very crisis they were trying to avoid, or stay put and hope the body sorted itself out. "All right," he said, "we wait. But I'm staying. Mr. Mercer, I'm staying." He grabbed the chair from the corner and positioned it beside the bed. "You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to acknowledge me. But I'm not leaving you alone with this." For a moment he thought she'd argue, thought she'd send him back to the barn with that same fierce independence. Instead, she just nodded, exhausted, and closed her eyes. Ivy appeared in the doorway with a wet cloth she'd clearly prepared without being asked. Caleb took it and pressed it to Elena's forehead. The girl climbed onto the foot of the bed, small and silent, and curled up there like a sentinel. The hours crawled past. The contractions came and went, never regular, never progressing into anything more dire. Caleb counted the time between them, watched Elena breathe through each wave, changed the cloth on her forehead when it grew warm, spoke when she needed distraction, stayed silent when she needed quiet. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Ivy fell asleep, her small body finally succumbing to exhaustion. Somewhere around 4, Elena's breathing evened out into something approaching rest between the pains. And somewhere around 5, when the first gray light started seeping through the window, the contractions stopped. Elena opened her eyes, hand immediately going to her belly. "He's quiet." "That's good." Caleb leaned forward. "How do you feel?" "Tired, sore, terrified." She managed a weak laugh. "Normal, I suppose." "Nothing about this is normal." "No." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he was suddenly aware of how close he was sitting, of the intimacy of this moment, a darkened bedroom, a crisis shared, the walls they'd both carefully maintained, now breached by necessity. "You stayed." "I said I would. People say a lot of things." Her voice was soft. "You meant it." Caleb didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to explain that staying had been the only option, that the alternative, leaving her alone, vulnerable, afraid, had been impossible to even consider. So he said nothing. "His name was Thomas," Elena said into the silence. "My husband, Ivy's father. He was kind, gentle. He died at Shiloh." She paused, gathering words. "His brother, James, the one I married after, he wasn't kind. He wasn't cruel exactly, just absent. He needed a wife to keep the creditors at bay. I needed a roof and a name for Ivy. It was a transaction. We both knew it." Her hand moved in slow circles over her belly. "When he died, I thought maybe we'd be free. But debt doesn't care about freedom. It just keeps compounding." "You don't have to tell me this. I know. I'm telling you anyway." She met his eyes. "You stayed with me tonight through something private and frightening and messy. That means something, even if you don't want it to." Caleb stood, suddenly needing distance, needing the walls back in place. "You should rest. Real rest. The baby's settled. You're out of danger." "Am I?" Elena's question wasn't about the baby. He looked at her, this woman who'd been sold like property, who'd climbed on his roof pregnant, who'd endured hours of pain with nothing but breath and will. This woman who was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with the slow, terrible possibility of mattering. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Ward." He left before she could say anything else, before Ivy could wake and see him there, before the sunrise could illuminate exactly how far he'd strayed from the careful distance he'd promised himself. Back in the barn, he didn't sleep. He sat in the loft, watching the house, watching the window of Elena's room, making sure no light rekindled that would signal trouble returning. And when the sun finally cleared the horizon and Ivy emerged to feed the chickens that didn't exist, he climbed down and went back to work, pretending the night hadn't changed anything. But it had. The next week passed in careful navigation of this new territory. Elena recovered slowly, staying in the house more, resting when her body demanded it. Ivy took on small tasks without being asked, gathering eggs from the imaginary chickens, which actually meant collecting fallen apples from the one surviving tree, sweeping the porch, talking to General when Caleb was working nearby. And Caleb found himself drifting closer to the house, fixing the porch step that sagged, oiling the hinges on the kitchen door, installing a new pump handle that didn't stick. Small things, necessary things, things that just happened to require him to be near. He told himself it was practical. The house needed maintenance. He was just being efficient. He knew he was lying. 8 days after the false labor, Caleb came back from town, a trip he'd made to get supplies and specifically to avoid any questions about his new living situation, to find Ivy waiting by the barn. "Mama wants to talk to you." His heart dropped. This was it. She'd decided to leave. She'd found somewhere better, someone better, some solution that didn't involve living in isolation with a broken rancher who couldn't even manage basic human connection. "All right." He followed Ivy to the house. Elena was in the kitchen, and spread across the table was fabric. A lot of fabric. Caleb recognized it. The curtains from his and Sarah's bedroom, the ones he'd packed away because looking at them had been unbearable. "I found these in the attic," Elena said without preamble. "I hope that's all right. I was looking for extra blankets and—" She stopped, reading his face. "If you don't want me to use them, I won't. but they're beautiful fabric, and Ivy needs a proper dress, and I thought, it's fine. The words came out rough. Use whatever you find, I don't need them. Elena's hand stilled on the fabric. These were your wife's. They were curtains. They were hers. Elena's voice gentled. Mr. Mercer, I can find something else. I said use them. He turned toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Sarah would have liked that. Knowing they were being used for something, she hated waste, hated things sitting idle when they could be useful. He forced himself to look at the fabric, at the cheerful yellow print Sarah had been so proud of. Make your daughter a dress. Make yourself one too, if there's enough. Sarah would have insisted. He left before Elena could respond, before the tightness in his chest could become something more visible. But as he crossed the yard, he heard Ivy's voice drift through the open window. Mama, why is he sad? Because remembering people we loved is sometimes the same as missing them. Do you miss my papa? A pause. Then, every day, sweetheart, every single day. Caleb kept walking. 2 weeks became 3. The heat of summer pressed down on the ranch like a weight. Caleb worked through it, driving himself harder than necessary, coming back to the barn exhausted enough that sleep came without thought. Elena worked too, he noticed. Despite the heat, despite her condition, despite everything. The house slowly transformed, not back to what it had been, but into something new, cleaner, more organized, lived in, and Ivy bloomed. It was the only word for it. The watchful, wary child from the auction platform began to unfold into someone lighter. She laughed at General's attempts to steal her apples. She sang while she swept the porch. She ran, actually ran, arms wide, through the scrub grass like it was a palace garden. Caleb tried not to notice. Failed. She likes it here. Elena's voice came from behind him. He was fixing the corral fence, and he hadn't heard her approach. I thought the isolation would be hard on her, but she thrives on it. Kids are adaptable. Some kids. Elena leaned against the fence post. Ivy's father used to say she had an old soul, that she'd seen too much in her short life. The war, the poverty after, She stopped. Other things. I thought maybe she'd forgotten, but you can't forget what shapes you. Caleb hammered another nail, the sound sharp in the afternoon air. She seems happy now. She is, which terrifies me. He looked up at that. Elena's eyes were on her daughter, who was currently trying to teach General to bow like a gentleman. When you're happy, you have something to lose. When you have something to lose, you're vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, her hand moved to her belly in that unconscious protective gesture. The world tends to take notice. So you'd rather she stayed miserable? Stayed guarded? I'd rather she stayed safe. Elena's voice cracked slightly. But I don't know how to give her that. I don't know how to give either of my children that. Caleb set down the hammer. You're doing it, right now, keeping them fed, sheltered, away from people who'd hurt them. That's safety. For how long? We can't stay here forever. Why not? The question surprised them both. Elena turned to look at him fully. Because this isn't our home, Mr. Mercer. It's yours. You're just what? Borrowing it? Passing through? He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. I told you when you got here. The house is yours as long as you need it. That hasn't changed. But the $100 was spent the moment I bid. The debt settled, Mrs. Ward, has been from the beginning. He picked up the hammer again, needing something to do with his hands. You want to leave, leave. But don't leave because you think you owe me something, or because you think you're not welcome. Leave because you want to, or stay for the same reason. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. What do you want, Mr. Mercer? I want... He stopped, started again. I want you and Ivy to be safe. I want that baby to be born healthy. I want you to have choices, real ones, not the kind that get forced on you by circumstances or debt or men who think they have the right to decide your life. And after? After the baby comes and we're stable and we have those choices? Caleb looked at her. At this woman who'd somehow become real to him despite all his efforts to keep her abstract, who'd fixed his roof and endured pain with dignity and transformed his dead house into something living. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Liar. But she said it gently. You think about everything. You plan for everything, including us leaving. Yeah, I do. And if we don't? If we stay? The question hung between them, heavy with implication, with possibility, with all the complications Caleb had been trying to avoid since the moment he'd opened his mouth in that town square. Then you stay, he said finally, and we figure out what that means as we go. It wasn't a promise, wasn't a declaration, but it was honest, and maybe that was worth more. Elena nodded slowly. All right, we'll stay. For now, until we know what comes next. For now, Caleb echoed. She went back to the house. Caleb went back to the fence, and Ivy continued trying to teach general manners, her laughter carrying across the yard like music from another life. That night, Caleb sat in the barn loft and acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He didn't want them to leave, didn't want the house to go dark again, didn't want the silence to return. But wanting was dangerous. Wanting led to hope, and hope led to loss. And loss was something he'd sworn never to survive again. So he sat there in the dark, caught between what he wanted and what he could endure, and tried to convince himself that the difference mattered. 3 weeks turned into 4. The yellow fabric became a dress. 2 dresses, actually. One for Ivy and one for Elena, who'd protested the waist until Ivy had begged with those serious eyes, and then Elena had surrendered like Caleb had known she would. He saw them wearing the dresses one Sunday morning, yellow against the brown landscape, bright and impossible. Sarah's curtains, transformed. Life from remnants. They fit, he said, because something needed to be said. Ivy's does. Mine is... Elena smoothed the fabric over her belly. Ambitious. Looks fine to me. You're not a reliable judge of women's fashion, Mr. Mercer. No, he agreed, but I know when something looks right. Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with dresses or fabric or practical concerns. Ivy broke the moment, running up with flushed cheeks. Mr. Mercer, General won't eat his apple. I think he's sick. He's not sick. He's spoiled. You've been feeding him too many treats. Can horses get spoiled? Everything can get spoiled if you're not careful. Ivy processed this seriously. Then I'll be more careful. I don't want to spoil him. She ran back to the barn, leaving Caleb and Elena standing in the yard. She trusts you, Elena said quietly. She shouldn't. Why? Because you think you'll disappoint her, or because you're afraid you won't? Caleb had no answer to that. So he did what he always did when things got too close to truth. He walked away. But that night, in the barn loft, he let himself imagine it. Let himself picture what it might look like if they stayed. If the house stayed lit. If Ivy kept laughing and Elena kept transforming his spaces, and the baby was born healthy, and time kept moving forward instead of staying frozen in that moment when Sarah died. It was a dangerous imagination. A foolish one. But for just that night, he allowed it. Morning came, and with it reality. The ranch needed work, the fence needed mending, the well pump still stuck occasionally. Life continued in its practical demands, and imagination retreated back to where it belonged, safely locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone. But something had shifted, some wall had developed a crack. And through that crack, impossible and unwanted and terrifying, something very much like hope began to seep. The crack in the wall widened on a Tuesday morning when Caleb rode back from checking the north fence line and found a horse tied to his porch rail. Not just any horse, a bay gelding with expensive tack and the kind of shine that spoke of regular grooming and good feed. Town horse. Money horse. His gut tightened. Elena stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other pressed protectively across her belly. Her face was pale, composed, but Caleb had learned to read the small signs. The tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself absolutely still, like movement might shatter something fragile. Behind her, visible through the open door, stood a man. Tall, well-dressed in a way that seemed aggressive out here, suit jacket despite the heat, boots polished to a mirror shine. He was talking, gesturing, his voice carrying across the yard in pieces. Completely inappropriate. Family obligations. Think about the child. Caleb dismounted and approached slowly, giving Elena time to see him, to signal if she needed him to intervene or stay back. She met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Not unless. He tied his horse anyway and walked to the porch. The man's voice cut off mid-sentence as Caleb's shadow fell across the threshold. Mr. Mercer. Elena's voice was carefully neutral. This is Grant Ward, my late husband's brother. Of course he was. Caleb should have guessed. The family resemblance was there in the jaw, the build, though this man had none of the absence Elena had described in James. Grant Ward was aggressively present in every gesture, every breath. Mr. Ward. Caleb didn't offer his hand. Grant's eyes swept over him with the kind of assessment men made when they were measuring another man's worth and finding it wanting. So you're the one who bought my sister-in-law at auction. I'm the one who ended a spectacle no one else had the spine to stop. How noble. Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes, though I have to wonder about the motivations of a man who'd take in a pregnant widow and her child, particularly a man with your reputation. Caleb felt his hands curl into fists, forced them to relax. My reputation? Hermit, recluse, the rancher who lost everything and withdrew from civilized society. Grant's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man used to courtrooms or boardrooms or anywhere words were weapons. Some in town wonder if you're quite stable, Mr. Mercer, taking on such responsibilities in your condition. Grant, Elena's voice cut through, sharp as glass. That's enough. Is it? Because from where I stand, my brother's widow and child are living in isolation with a stranger. My brother's unborn child, my blood, is being raised in circumstances that are, at best, questionable. Grant turned his attention back to Elena. I came here to offer you a proper solution. Come back to Denver with me. I have a house, resources, family who can help with the children. You'll want for nothing. Except freedom. Elena's words were quiet but iron-backed. Freedom? Grant laughed, and the sound made Caleb's teeth clench. Freedom to what? To live in the middle of nowhere with a man you barely know? To raise James's child in poverty? To pretend this arrangement is anything other than careful? Caleb's voice was soft, dangerous. Choose your next words very carefully. Grant's eyes snapped to him. Or what? You'll throw me off your property? I'm here on a family matter, Mr. Mercer. This doesn't concern you. Everything on this property concerns me. Caleb stepped onto the porch, closing the distance. Not threatening, just present. And you're standing on my porch insulting a woman under my roof, so it very much concerns me. Your roof that you installed her under after purchasing her like livestock. The words landed like a slap. Caleb felt them hit, felt the old shame rise. Because Grant wasn't wrong, was he? Not about the basic facts. Caleb had bought her, had brought her here, had created this entire situation that now left her vulnerable to exactly this kind of claim. But then Elena moved, stepped forward, positioning herself between them. I wasn't purchased like livestock, Grant. I was removed from a humiliating situation by someone who saw it for what it was, a disgrace masquerading as civic duty. Her voice was steady now, strengthening with each word. Mr. Mercer gave me shelter, gave Ivy and me safety, asked for nothing in return. That's more than your family ever did. My family. Your family let us starve. The words came out flat, factual. After James died, your mother offered prayers and platitudes. Your father offered advice on managing money we didn't have. You offered nothing at all until the debts became public embarrassment. Don't stand here now and pretend this is about care or blood or family obligation. This is about control, about not wanting the Ward name associated with scandal. Grant's face hardened. You're carrying a Ward child, Elena. That gives me rights. No. Elena's hand moved to her belly. It doesn't. This child is mine. James is dead. Your claim died with him. The law might see it differently. Then let the law decide. Caleb's voice cut through. But until then, Mrs. Ward stays here, by her choice, and you leave. Now. Grant's attention swung back to Caleb, and something cold entered his expression, something calculating. I see. So that's how it is. The grieving widower and the desperate widow. How convenient for you both. Get off my land! Or you'll what? Assault me? In front of witnesses? Grant gestured toward the yard, and Caleb realized Ivy was there, half hidden behind the water trough, watching everything with those two old eyes. That would certainly help your case. Caleb forced his breathing to steady, forced his hands to stay loose. This man wanted a fight, wanted Caleb to lose control, to give him ammunition for whatever legal or social warfare he was planning. I don't need to assault you, Caleb said quietly. I just need to stop being polite. This is private property. You're not welcome here. Leave, or I'll have the sheriff remove you for trespassing. The sheriff is a reasonable man, I'm sure once I explain the situation. The sheriff is a man who will uphold property rights. Caleb met Grant's eyes. And this property is mine. These people are under my protection. You want to contest that legally? Go ahead. But you'll do it from town, not from my porch. For a long moment, the air stretched tight as wire. Grant's jaw worked, calculation visible behind his eyes. Then he smiled, cold and knowing. This isn't over, Elena. That child you're carrying deserves better than this. James would have wanted, James is dead. Elena's voice broke on the words. He's dead, and he left us with nothing but debt and grief. You want to honor his memory? Then respect his widow's choices. But you won't, because this was never about James. It was never about me or Ivy or this baby. It's about your pride, about not having a ward raised in circumstances you deem beneath you. You think you're safe here? Grant's voice dropped, intimate and poisonous. You think this man will protect you when the novelty wears off? When the town's judgment gets too heavy? When you become more trouble than you're worth? He looked at Caleb. Men like you don't save people, Mr. Mercer. You collect them like broken things, thinking fixing them will fix what's broken in you. But it never does. And when you realize that, where do you think she'll be? The words hit deeper than Caleb wanted to admit. Hit the fear he'd been carrying since the auction, the certainty that this couldn't last, that he'd fail these people the same way he'd failed Sarah. But before he could respond, Elena spoke. Mr. Mercer isn't trying to fix anything. He's just trying to live with basic human decency. You should try it sometime. She turned to Grant fully. I'm not coming to Denver. I'm not subjecting my children to your version of family. I'm staying here, where I'm respected and safe and free to make my own choices. If you try to take that from me, I'll fight you. And I promise you, Grant, I've survived worse than your disapproval. Grant's face went through several expressions before settling on cold dismissal. We'll see how long your defiance lasts. Winter's coming. This ranch is barely functional. When the money runs out and the isolation crushes you, don't expect me to offer this opportunity again. He strode off the porch, untied his horse with sharp, angry movements, and swung into the saddle. For a moment he sat there, looking down at them. You're making a mistake, Elena. Both of you. Then he spurred his horse and rode away, dust rising behind him like a parting curse. The silence he left behind was enormous. Caleb watched until Grant disappeared from sight, then turned to Elena. She was shaking, he realized. Not visibly, she held herself too still for that, but he could see it in the white of her knuckles where she gripped the doorframe, in the careful control of her breathing. Are you? I'm fine. She pushed away from the door, moved into the house. Caleb followed. She made it to the kitchen table before her legs gave out, and she sat heavily, hands pressed flat to the scarred wood. Ivy appeared in the doorway, uncertain. Mama? Elena's face transformed. All the steel, all the control shifted into something gentle. I'm all right, sweetheart. Just needed to sit down. Why don't you go check on General? I think he was looking lonely. Ivy hesitated, clearly wanting to stay, to help somehow. But she nodded and slipped back outside, leaving them alone. He'll come back. Elena's voice was hollow. Or he'll send lawyers. Or he'll go to the sheriff with claims about my fitness as a mother. He won't just let this go. Caleb pulled out the other chair and sat. Let him come. Let him send whoever he wants. The law's on your side. You're the mother. He's got no legal claim. The law's flexible when you have money and influence. Elena looked at him, and her eyes were older than they should be. Grant has both. He sits on boards in Denver, knows judges, politicians. If he decides to make this ugly, he can. Then we'll get ugly right back. You don't understand. Her hands moved restlessly on the table. Men like Grant don't lose. They have resources, patience, connections. They wait until you're vulnerable and then they strike. And her voice caught. I'm so tired of being vulnerable, Mr. Mercer. So tired of waiting for the next disaster. Caleb reached across the table, stopped, pulled his hand back. Reaching for her felt like crossing another line, and there were already too many lines blurring. Listen to me, he said instead. I don't have money, don't have influence. But I have this land, and on this land, my word counts for something. You said you're staying, so you stay. And anyone who has a problem with that goes through me first. That's not your fight. Yes, it is. The words came out harder than he meant. It became my fight the moment I opened my mouth in that town square. Maybe before that. Maybe the moment I saw what was happening and didn't walk away. He leaned forward. You think I don't know what people say about me? That I'm broken? Unstable? That I've got no business taking on anyone else's troubles when I can barely manage my own? He saw recognition in her eyes. Grant had echoed those same words. They're probably right. But here's what I know for certain. You're not a trouble, Elena. Neither is Ivy. Neither is that baby. And anyone who comes here trying to claim otherwise will find out exactly how unstable I can be. A sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. You shouldn't make promises like that. I'm not promising. I'm stating fact. He stood, needing movement. Grant wants a fight. He'll get one. But it won't be the fight he expects. Because he's calculating based on shame and scandal and the assumption that I care what Salvation Creek thinks of me. Caleb moved to the window, looking out at his land. His broken, stubborn, impossible land. I don't. I stopped caring about that 2 years ago when this town showed me exactly what its concern was worth. Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was small. What if he's right? About the winter? About the ranch failing? About me? Caleb turned back. About us not lasting? She nodded. Then we fail. He said it simply, honestly. We do our best and we fail and we figure out what comes next. But we fail on our terms, not his. We fail because life is hard and circumstances are cruel, not because we surrendered to a man who thinks money gives him the right to decide how people live. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. Nothing about this is simple. Caleb crossed back to the table. But it is clear. You want to stay, you stay. You want to leave, you leave. But it's your choice, Elena. Not Grant's. Not the town's. Not even mine. Yours. She looked up at him. This man who'd somehow become more than a stranger, more than a reluctant host. This man who stood between her and the world's cruelty with nothing but stubborn will and land that barely sustained him. I want to stay, she said quietly. Even knowing what's coming, even knowing it might all fall apart. I want to stay. Then you stay. The decision hung between them, simple and terrifying. Outside, Ivy's voice drifted through the window, talking to General in that serious way she had, explaining about the man who'd come and gone and why Mama was upset, but it was going to be okay. Caleb hoped the girl was right. The days after Grant's visit felt different, heavier, like waiting for a storm you could feel in your bones but couldn't see on the horizon. Caleb caught himself scanning the road more often, listening for approaching horses. Elena moved through the house with that same careful control, but he could see the tension in every gesture. Ivy felt it too. She stayed closer to the house, her brief blooming into carefree childhood contracting back toward wariness. 4 days after Grant left, the sheriff arrived. Caleb was working the well pump. The damn thing had finally given up completely when he saw the dust rising from the road. One rider. Unhurried. When the figure resolved into Sheriff Tom Morrison, Caleb set down his tools and waited. Morrison was a fair man, as far as such things went. He'd been the one to tell Caleb about Sarah's death when it happened, had stood silent at the grave, had left him alone when alone was what Caleb needed. Now he dismounted carefully, like a man carrying an unpleasant duty. Caleb? Tom? Got a few minutes? Seems I do. Morrison glanced toward the house. Elena had appeared on the porch, Ivy beside her. Maybe we could talk private? Nothing you need to say can't be said in front of Mrs. Ward. It's her business we're discussing, I imagine. The sheriff's mouth tightened. Grant Ward came to see me, had some concerns. I bet he did. Said his sister-in-law and niece are living out here in questionable circumstances. Said the arrangement raises questions about propriety and the welfare of the child. Children, he corrected, nodding toward Elena's belly. And what do you think, Tom? Morrison took off his hat, turned it in his hands. I think Grant Ward is a man used to getting his way and doesn't much like being told no. I also think I've got a job to do, which includes making sure no one's being held against their will or in danger. Then ask her. Caleb gestured toward the porch. Ask Mrs. Ward if she's here against her will. They walked to the house together. Elena stood straight, meeting the sheriff's eyes without flinching. Mrs. Ward, Morrison's voice was respectful. I need to ask you some questions. You understand it's just my job. I understand. Are you staying here of your own free will? Yes. Has Mr. Mercer made any demands of you? Any requirements for your continued residence? Elena's expression didn't change. Mr. Mercer has asked nothing of me except that I take care of myself and my daughter. He's given us shelter, space, and respect. Nothing more, nothing less. And you feel safe here? Safer than I've felt anywhere in 2 years, Sheriff. Morrison absorbed this, then turned to Ivy. And you, miss? How are you finding life on the ranch? Ivy looked at her mother, who nodded permission. It's quiet. I like quiet. You're being treated well. Mr. Mercer lets me feed General apples, and he's teaching me about horses, and he fixed Mama's roof when it leaked. The words came out in a rush, defensive. He's not mean or scary. He's just sad sometimes. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at Caleb, something that might have been sympathy crossing his face. I see. Is that all, Sheriff? Elena's voice was polite but firm. Or did Grant have other accusations he'd like you to investigate? He's concerned about the coming winter, about whether this ranch can adequately provide. I've survived worse winters with less. Elena cut him off. I appreciate your concern, but as you can see, we're fine. We're fed, we're sheltered, and we're here by choice. If that's not sufficient for Grant Ward, perhaps he should examine why a woman would prefer isolation to his hospitality. Morrison nodded slowly. That's fair. He turned to Caleb. Grant also suggested that your state of mind might not be stable, that taking on this responsibility might be more than you can handle. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. My state of mind is my business. It is, right up until it affects others. Morrison held up a hand before Caleb could respond. I'm not saying I agree with him. I'm telling you what was said, and I'm telling you that he's not going to let this drop. He's already talking about custody claims, about the welfare of the unborn child. He's building a case, Caleb. Let him build. Don't be foolish. This isn't pride or stubbornness. This is about these people. Morrison gestured to Elena and Ivy. You want to protect them? Then be smart about it. Get ahead of this. Make the arrangement legal, proper. Document everything. Don't give him ammunition. What are you suggesting? Elena asked. Morrison looked uncomfortable. I'm suggesting that the situation as it stands leaves questions. Questions that a man like Grant Ward can exploit. If there was a more formal arrangement, something legally binding that established Mr. Mercer's role and your status, it would close those questions. The implication hung in the air. You're suggesting marriage. Elena's voice was flat. I'm suggesting protection. Legal protection. Morrison put his hat back on. Look, I don't care how people arrange their lives. Not my business. But I do care about keeping the peace and following the law. And the law, as it stands, gives Grant Ward avenues to pursue this. A formal arrangement would close those avenues. So we should marry to satisfy legal technicalities and Grant Ward's pride? Caleb's voice was sharp. I'm saying you should do whatever keeps these people safe. Morrison's eyes met his. You bought her out of a bad situation, Caleb. Good, but buying isn't protecting, not long term. You want to actually help? Then think past tomorrow. The sheriff left shortly after, his duty discharged. Caleb and Elena stood on the porch, watching him disappear down the road. "He's not wrong," Elena said finally. "I'm not marrying you to spite Grant Ward. I'm not suggesting you should." She turned to face him. "But he's right about the vulnerabilities, about the questions. As long as I'm just here, with no legal connection, no formal standing, Grant can challenge it, can claim I'm being taken advantage of, can push for custody of the baby once it's born. Let him try." Caleb. His name in her mouth was strange, intimate. She'd been calling him Mr. Mercer for weeks. "Listen to what I'm saying. I don't want marriage. I don't want another arrangement based on necessity and convenience. I had that with James, and it was empty and awful. But I also don't want to lose my children, and if marrying you keeps them safe, then I'll do it. I'll stand in front of whoever needs to witness it and say whatever words need saying, but not for you, for them." "That's not—" Caleb stopped, started again. "You shouldn't have to make that choice." "But I do. That's the reality." Her hand moved to her belly. "Fair doesn't enter into it. Then we find another way." "What other way? Hope Grant gives up? Hope the law sides with a penniless widow over a wealthy, connected man?" She shook her head. "I've been hoping for better circumstances my entire adult life, Mr. Mercer. Hope doesn't feed children. It doesn't keep them safe. Action does. Difficult, uncomfortable action." Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd somehow become essential, who stood on his porch talking about marriage like a business transaction because the alternative was losing everything. The practical cruelty of it burned in his chest. "I won't do that to you," he said. "Won't trap you in another empty arrangement." "Then make it not empty." Elena's voice was quiet but steady. "Make it mean something. Not romance, not love, not any of that. Just partnership. Mutual protection. You guard my back, I'll guard yours. We face whatever comes together instead of separately. That's not marriage. Maybe it's better than marriage. Maybe it's actually honest." They stood there in the afternoon heat, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of them. Ivy was inside, singing softly to herself, unaware that her future was being negotiated on the porch. Somewhere in Elena's belly, another life waited, equally oblivious to the machinations of adults and law and pride. "I need to think," Caleb said. "Take your time." Elena moved toward the door, then paused. "But Caleb, don't take too long. Grant Ward isn't a patient man, and neither is Winter." She went inside, leaving him alone with the impossible. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in the barn loft, turning the problem over and over. Marriage as protection, marriage as legal shield, marriage as the only weapon they had against a man with resources and reach. Marriage as the thing he'd sworn never to attempt again. Sarah's ghost haunted every corner of his thoughts, the promises he'd made her, the promises he'd broken by failing to keep her alive, the vow he'd made at her grave to never put another woman in that position, to never again be responsible for someone else's life and dreams. But Elena wasn't asking for his dreams. She was asking for his name, his legal protection, his willingness to stand between her children and the world's cruelty. And maybe, in the darkness of the barn loft, Caleb could admit the truth he'd been avoiding. He didn't want them to leave, didn't want the house to go dark again, didn't want to lose the sound of Ivy's laughter or Elena's quiet strength or the possibility that life could be more than just surviving until death. That didn't make marriage right, didn't make it fair, didn't make it anything except the best of terrible options. By morning, he'd made his choice. He found Elena in the kitchen, making breakfast from their dwindling supplies. He'd need to go to town soon. Another complication. "I'll do it," he said without preamble. "I'll marry you, but on one condition." Elena's hand stilled on the pan. "What condition?" "It's real. Not on paper, but in practice. We make this a partnership, like you said, equal say, equal decisions. I don't own you, you don't owe me. We protect each other and the children, that's all. But it's real." She turned to face him fully. "And when I can't pull my weight, when the baby comes and I'm useless for weeks, when I'm more burden than partner, then you rest and recover and remember that partnership isn't about equal contribution every single day. It's about balance over time." He held her gaze. "I'm not your employer, Elena, and I'm not your savior, But I can be your partner, if you'll let me. Something shifted in her expression. The careful guard dropped, just for a moment, and he saw the exhaustion underneath. The fear. The desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this could work. All right, she said. Yes, we'll make it real. Then we'll ride to town tomorrow. Make it legal before Grant has time to maneuver. Tomorrow, Elena echoed. They stood there in the kitchen, two people agreeing to bind their lives together, not from love, but from necessity. Not from passion, but from the simple, stubborn refusal to let cruelty win. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to human concerns. Inside, Ivy appeared in the doorway, sleepy and rumpled. Mama, is everything okay? Elena crossed to her daughter, knelt with some difficulty, and smoothed back her hair. Everything's going to be fine, sweetheart. Mr. Mercer and I are going to make sure of it. Ivy looked between them, processing with that eerie childhood wisdom. Are you getting married? Yes, Caleb said before Elena could soften it. We are. Why? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Because sometimes, Elena said carefully, people need to make promises to each other, official promises, so everyone knows we're family. But we're already family, Ivy said, as if it were obvious. We live together. We take care of each other. That's what family is. Out of the mouths of children. Caleb felt something crack in his chest, the same thing that had cracked when Ivy's eyes found his in the auction crowd. You're right, he said. We are already family. Now we're just going to make it official. Ivy smiled, satisfied with this answer, and went to feed General his morning apple. Elena stood, one hand braced on the chair. She makes it sound simple. Maybe it is, Caleb said. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. Or maybe she's 7 and doesn't understand what's coming. Maybe. He moved toward the door. But maybe understanding what's coming isn't the same as being ready for it. And maybe being ready is what we make of it when it arrives. He left to start the day's work, leaving Elena in the kitchen with breakfast and choices and the knowledge that tomorrow everything would change. For better or worse, they'd find out together. They rode to town at first light, the wagon wheels cutting through morning mist that clung to the scrubland like reluctance itself. Caleb drove. Elena sat beside him in the yellow dress she'd made from Sarah's curtains, her hands folded carefully over her belly. Ivy perched between them, unusually quiet, sensing the weight of what was happening even if she couldn't fully name it. No one spoke. What was there to say? They were riding toward a ceremony that was equal parts protection and surrender, defiance and desperation. Words would only complicate what needed to remain simple. The town materialized out of the haze like a judgment taking solid form. Caleb felt Elena stiffen beside him as the first buildings appeared, as the possibility of eyes and whispers became certainty. He wanted to offer comfort, reassurance, something, but his own chest was tight with a familiar dread, the dread of facing these people again, of subjecting himself to their scrutiny and their barely concealed satisfaction that the hermit rancher had finally cracked under the weight of his isolation. Let them think what they wanted. He'd stopped caring about Salvation Creek's opinions the day they'd buried Sarah. Or so he told himself. The courthouse sat at the center of town, a squat brick building that housed both legal proceedings and the town's collective sense of civic importance. Caleb pulled the wagon up front, set the brake, and climbed down. He reached up to help Elena, and for once she took his hand without protest. Her fingers were cold despite the warming day. We don't have to do this, he said quietly. We can turn around right now. Yes, we do. Her voice was steady. And no, we can't. They walked up the courthouse steps together, Ivy between them, holding both their hands. The door opened before they reached it. Sheriff Morrison stood in the frame, his face carefully neutral. Caleb, Mrs. Ward. His eyes dropped to Ivy, softened slightly. Miss Ivy? Wasn't expecting to see you folks today. We need to see Judge Hartwell, Caleb said. It's a legal matter. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or confirmation of a suspicion. Judge is in his chambers. I'll let him know you're here. They waited in the narrow hallway, standing because sitting felt like surrender. Through the walls came the muffled sounds of town business, voices raised in argument, the scratch of pen on paper, boots on wood floors. The ordinary machinery of civilization grinding forward, while Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. This was a mistake. Had to be. He was binding himself to another woman, another set of promises he'd inevitably fail to keep. He was dragging Elena into a legal arrangement that would tie her to a failing ranch and a broken man. He was... Elena's hand found his, squeezed once, brief, almost impersonal, but enough to pull him back from the spiral. "Breathe," she said softly. "Just breathe." He did. In through his nose, out through his mouth, the way he'd coached her through the false labor that night, the way she was now coaching him through this different kind of crisis. Partnership, he reminded himself. That's what they'd agreed to. Not romance, not rescue. Just two people facing the world's cruelty together instead of separately. The door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Hartwell emerged, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by very little. Those eyes swept over the three of them and settled into something that might have been resignation. "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Ward," he gestured to his office. "Please, come in." The office was spare, functional. Law books lined the walls. A desk dominated the center, buried under papers that suggested the messiness of justice. Hartwell settled into his chair and folded his hands. "I assume you're here regarding the situation with Grant Ward." "We're here to get married," Caleb said bluntly. "Today, if possible." Hartwell's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. And you understand the legal implications, the permanence." "We understand perfectly," Elena said. "We're both adults. We're both of sound mind. We're both entering this arrangement freely. That's all the law requires, isn't it?" "The law requires that, yes." Hartwell leaned back in his chair. "But the law also recognizes that marriage is more than a contract. It's a commitment, one that shouldn't be entered into lightly, especially under pressure." "Every marriage is entered into under some kind of pressure." Elena's voice was calm but unyielding. "Financial pressure, social pressure. The pressure of circumstance. Ours is no different except that we're honest about it." "Fair enough?" Hartwell turned his attention to Caleb. "You're certain about this? You understand you'll be taking on not just Mrs. Ward, but her children? The responsibility for their welfare, their future?" "I'm certain." The words came easier than Caleb expected, maybe because they were true. "And I'm aware of the responsibilities." Hartwell studied them both for a long moment. Then he nodded, pulled out a ledger, and began writing. "Very well. I'll need witnesses. Sheriff Morrison can serve as one. Mrs. Patterson from the Mercantile can serve as the other if she's available." "No." Elena's voice was sharp. "Not Mrs. Patterson. She was at the auction. She stopped, composed herself. "I'd prefer someone else." Hartwell's expression shifted into something almost like sympathy. "I understand. Let me see who else is available." He stepped out. The silence in his absence was heavy. Caleb looked at Elena, saw the tension in every line of her body, saw her fighting to maintain the composure that had gotten her through the auction, through Grant's visit, through every indignity life had thrown at her. "Elena, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't apologize. Don't try to make this easier. Let's just do what needs doing and be done with it." Ivy, who'd been silent throughout, spoke up. "Mama, are you sad?" Elena's face transformed, all the steel melting into tenderness. "No, sweetheart. I'm just nervous. Getting married is important, even when it's..." She paused, searching for words. "Even when it's practical." "Mr. Mercer's nice," Ivy offered. "He'll be a good husband." The simplicity of the child's faith was devastating. Caleb felt it land in his chest like a stone. "I'll try," he said, because he owed her honesty at least. "I'll try to be." Hartwell returned with two people in tow. A clerk from the land office, a young man who looked uncomfortable but professional. And to Caleb's surprise, Doc Reynolds, the town physician. "Doc volunteered to witness," Hartwell explained. "Said he owed you a favor, Caleb." Caleb met the old doctor's eyes. Reynolds had been the one to tell him Sarah was dead. had sat with him in that awful room while Caleb's world had ended, had asked for nothing, expected nothing, just offered what comfort a medical man could to a grief that had no cure. "Thank you," Caleb said. Reynolds nodded. "Least I can do." They assembled in front of the desk. Hartwell opened a book, found the page, and began reading the words that would bind them. The language was formal, antiquated, full of promises about honor and cherishing until death do you part, words that felt both too heavy and too light for what was actually happening here. When Hartwell reached the vows themselves, he paused. "Do you, Caleb James Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The words hung in the air. Behind them, Caleb could hear the ghost of different words, different promises, made to a different woman in a different time. Sarah's voice, bright with hope, saying yes to a future they'd both believed in. But Sarah was gone, and Elena was here, looking at him with steady eyes that asked for nothing except that he show up, that he stand between her and the cruelty, that he mean what he said when he said it. "I do." Hartwell turned to Elena. "Do you, Elena Margaret Ward, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Elena's hand tightened on Ivy's shoulder. Her other hand moved to her belly, that protective gesture Caleb had come to recognize. Then she lifted her chin and looked directly at him. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Hartwell closed the book. "What the law has joined, let no man put asunder. You may seal the union with a kiss." The kiss. Caleb had forgotten about that part. He looked at Elena, saw his own uncertainty reflected back. They stood there, newly married, separated by 2 feet of space that suddenly felt impossible to cross. Then Elena stepped forward, rose on her toes despite her condition, and pressed her lips briefly to his. It was chaste, practical, over almost before it began. But Caleb felt it everywhere. The warmth of her mouth, the faint scent of soap and sunshine, the reality of another person close enough to touch. She stepped back. They both breathed. "Congratulations," Hartwell said, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely certain congratulations were warranted. "I'll file the papers today. You're legally married in the eyes of the territory." Caleb paid the fee, signed where indicated. Elena signed her new name, Elena Margaret Mercer, in careful script, and something about seeing it on paper made the whole thing devastatingly real. They emerged from the courthouse into full morning. The town was awake now, people moving about their business. Caleb felt their eyes like physical weight, felt the whispers starting even before they'd reached the wagon. "Well," Elena's voice was carefully neutral. "That's done." "That's done," Caleb agreed. "Can we get supplies while we're here? We're low on flour and Ivy needs new shoes." The mundane request in the wake of what they'd just done was almost funny. Almost. Caleb nodded and offered his arm. Elena took it, and they walked toward the mercantile like a normal married couple might, with Ivy skipping slightly ahead, examining the town with fresh eyes. The mercantile fell silent when they entered. Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter, her face cycling through shock, scandal, and reluctant acceptance. Around the store, other customers froze, watching. "Mr. Mercer," Mrs. Patterson finally managed. "Mrs." She paused, recalculating. "Mrs. Mercer, how can I help you?" "Flour, 20 pounds, Elena said evenly. "Salt, sugar, coffee. Children's shoes, size appropriate for a 7-year-old, and whatever dried beans you have in stock." Mrs. Patterson moved mechanically to fulfill the order, her eyes darting between Elena and Caleb like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't balance. The other customers weren't even pretending not to stare. "Heard you were at the courthouse this morning." The voice came from near the back. "Martin Hughes, the banker, conducting legal business." "That's right," Caleb said. "What kind of business?" The question was intrusive, inappropriate, and entirely expected. Caleb felt Elena tense beside him. "The kind that's none of yours," he said evenly. "Now, Caleb, No need to be hostile. We're all just concerned. Are you? Elena turned to face Hughes fully. Because I don't recall much concern when my daughter and I were being auctioned in the town square. I don't recall concern when we were sleeping in a boarding house with debts we couldn't pay. The concern seems to have materialized rather suddenly. Hughes had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was an unfortunate situation. But this, whatever this arrangement is, it raises questions. Then let me answer them. Elena's voice carried across the suddenly quiet store. Caleb and I were married this morning by Judge Hartwell with Sheriff Morrison and Doc Reynolds as witnesses. It's legal, it's proper, and it's none of your business why or how. If you have concerns about my welfare, you can rest easy. I'm exactly where I choose to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Mrs. Patterson's hand stilled on the flour sack. Well, Hughes cleared his throat. I suppose congratulations are in order then. You can keep your congratulations, Caleb said. We'll just take our supplies and be on our way. They loaded the wagon in tense silence, the town's eyes following every movement. Caleb helped Elena up to the seat, lifted Ivy beside her, and climbed up himself. He was reaching for the reins when a voice called out, Caleb, wait! Doc Reynolds approached the wagon, moving with the careful deliberation of an old man who'd learned to conserve energy. He looked up at Elena with professional assessment. Mrs. Mercer, when are you due? 6 weeks, maybe 8. And you're planning to deliver at the ranch? Elena's jaw set. I don't have much choice. You have a choice. You could come stay in town. I have a room above my office. Clean, private. I could monitor the pregnancy, be there when labor starts. That's kind of you, Elena said. But I'll manage at the ranch. With all respect, childbirth isn't something you manage. It's something you survive. Reynolds' voice was gentle, but firm, especially after a difficult pregnancy. Those false labor pains you had, they're a warning. Your body's under stress. How did you... Elena stopped, looked at Caleb. I told him, Caleb said. After the wedding, asked his advice. Something flashed across Elena's face. Not anger, but something more complicated. You had no right. I had every right. You're my wife now. Your health is my concern. The words came out harder than he'd intended. He softened his voice. Elena, please. At least consider it. I'm not leaving the ranch. Then let me come to you, Reynolds said. 2 weeks before your due date, I'll ride out. Stay until the baby comes. That way you're at home, but you're not alone. Elena looked between them, calculation visible in her eyes. This was help. But help came with debt, with obligation, with the risk of being beholden. What would you charge for that? She asked. Nothing. Reynolds held up a hand before she could protest. Before you argue, let me explain. I've been a doctor for 40 years. I've delivered hundreds of babies, and I've lost patients I shouldn't have lost because they were too proud or too poor to ask for help. If you'll let me do my job, that's payment enough. I don't accept charity. It's not charity, it's medicine. There's a difference. He looked at Caleb. Talk to your wife. Make her see reason. He walked away before either could respond, leaving them with a decision that felt like a trap, no matter which way they chose. Caleb clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward. They left Salvation Creek behind, the town's judgment hanging in the air like smoke. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Ivy's small voice broke the silence. Does this mean I should call Mr. Mercer Papa? Elena's breath caught. Caleb felt the weight of the question settle on his shoulders. You can call me whatever feels right, he said carefully. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, or nothing at all. I'm not trying to replace your father, Ivy. I couldn't if I tried. But you're married to Mama now. That makes you my papa, doesn't it? In the eyes of the law, yes. But family is more than law. He glanced at the small girl between them. Your real father was a good man who loved you. I'm just the man who's here now, trying to do right by you and your mama. That's all. Ivy considered this with that unnerving seriousness. I think I'll call you Caleb. Papa feels like it belongs to someone else. Is that okay? That's more than okay. Elena was silent, her face turned away toward the passing landscape. But Caleb saw her wipe her eyes, saw the subtle shake of her shoulders. Grief and relief tangled together, too complicated to separate. The ranch appeared like a refuge, the broken building suddenly looking less desolate and more like home. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the house and began unloading supplies. Elena climbed down carefully, one hand on her belly, and stopped him with a touch to his arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you said to Ivy about her father. It was the truth. Truth isn't always kind. You made it kind." She paused. "And about Doc Reynolds, I'll think about it, having him here for the birth. I won't promise anything, but I'll consider it. That's all I'm asking." They stood there in the yard, newly married, still strangers in so many ways. Then Ivy called from the house, something about General and apples, and the moment broke. The days that followed established a new pattern. They were married now, legally bound, but the practical reality changed less than Caleb had expected. Elena still slept in the main bedroom. Caleb still took the barn. They still moved around each other carefully, negotiating space and boundaries and the strange new weight of commitment. But small things shifted. Elena started calling him by his first name instead of Mr. Mercer. He found himself eating dinner at the house more often, the three of them sharing the table in companionable silence. Ivy began asking him questions about ranch work, about horses, about the land, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged. And the town's reaction, which Caleb had braced for, came in whispers and sideways glances rather than direct confrontation. People gave them a wide berth when they came for supplies. Conversations died when they entered a room, but no one challenged them openly. The marriage had done exactly what it was supposed to do, provided a legal shield against judgment, even if it couldn't stop the judgment itself. 2 weeks after the wedding, Grant Ward returned. Caleb was mending fence when he saw the dust cloud. Multiple riders this time. 3 horses. Grant in the lead, flanked by 2 men Caleb didn't recognize. They had the look of hired muscle, city men playing at frontier roughness. Caleb set down his tools and walked to meet them. Elena emerged from the house, drying her hands on her apron. Ivy stayed on the porch, watching. Grant dismounted with theatrical precision, his movements designed to convey authority. "Mr. Mercer, I heard the most interesting news in town." "I bet you did." "Married. How convenient." Grant's smile was cold. "How very, very convenient. Tell me, did you discuss this arrangement before or after you purchased her?" "Watch your mouth." Caleb's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Or what? You'll assault me in front of witnesses again?" Grant gestured to his companions. "These are colleagues from Denver, Mr. Patterson and Mr. Cole. They're here to document the living conditions, the suitability of the environment for raising children." "Document all you want. Then get off my property." "I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore." Grant pulled papers from his jacket. "I've filed a petition with the territorial court challenging the validity of your marriage. The timing is suspicious, the circumstances questionable. A rushed ceremony immediately after I raised concerns about my sister-in-law's welfare? It reeks of coercion." "I wasn't coerced." Elena stepped forward, positioning herself beside Caleb. "I married Caleb of my own free will. Judge Hartwell verified that. Sheriff Morrison witnessed it. Under duress. Financial desperation. The threat of losing your children." Grant's voice was smooth, practiced. "Legal. Those aren't conditions that support free choice, Elena. Any judge would see that. Any judge would see a man harassing his brother's widow." Caleb met Grant's eyes. "You've got no standing here. The marriage is legal. Your petition will fail." "Perhaps. Or perhaps the court will look at a pregnant woman living in isolation with a known recluse, a man with documented mental instability following his wife's death, and decide the children would be better served elsewhere." Grant's expression was triumphant. "I'm not claiming the children out of malice, Mr. Mercer. I'm claiming them out of concern, legitimate, documentable concern." "You're claiming them out of pride," Elena said, "because you can't stand that I chose freedom over your control. I'm claiming them because that baby you're carrying is a ward, my blood, and I won't stand by while it's raised in poverty and isolation by a man who can barely keep his own land functioning." The words hit their target. Caleb felt them land, felt the truth of his failing ranch, his inadequacy, his inability to provide the kind of life these children deserved. But then Elena spoke, her voice cutting through his spiral. That baby is mine. Mine to raise, mine to protect, mine to decide what's best for. Not yours, not the court's, mine. She stepped closer to Grant, fearless despite the difference in their positions. You want to fight? You'll get one. But you won't get my children. You won't get to parade your concern and your money and your influence and pretend it makes you family. Family shows up when people need them, not after they've already survived. Grant's jaw tightened. We'll see what the court says about that. You have 30 days to respond to the petition. Use them wisely. He mounted his horse, his companions following suit. They rode away slowly, deliberately, making sure their exit was as theatrical as their entrance. The silence they left behind was crushing. Elena swayed. Elena, Caleb caught her arm, steadied her. Inside, now. I'm fine. You're shaking. Inside. He guided her to the house, sat her at the table. Ivy appeared with water without being asked, her small face pale with understanding beyond her years. He's going to take us away, isn't he? Ivy's voice was small. No. Caleb knelt to her level. He's going to try. But trying isn't succeeding. We won't let it happen. How? Elena's voice was hollow. You heard him. He's got lawyers, documentation, influence. What do we have? Each other. Caleb stood. And the truth. And 30 days to build a case that shows you're exactly where you should be. With a failing rancher on failing land? Elena's laugh was bitter. That's not much of a case, Caleb. Then we make it more. He turned to face her fully. We make this ranch work. We show profit, productivity, stability. We document everything. Your health, Ivy's education, the household accounts. We get character witnesses. We build a record that proves beyond doubt that you're not here out of desperation, but out of choice. That this isn't the worst option, it's the best one. In 30 days? In however long it takes. He crouched beside her chair. Elena, listen to me. Grant Ward thinks he's already won. Thinks he can intimidate us into surrender or wait us out until Winter proves his point. But he's wrong. He's wrong because he doesn't understand what we are. What are we? Her eyes met his, searching. Survivors. The word came out fierce. We're people who've lost everything and kept going, who've been broken and rebuilt ourselves from scraps, who've stood on auction blocks and in courtrooms and faced down every cruelty the world could offer and still chose to keep breathing. That's not weakness, Elena. That's the strongest thing there is. Something shifted in her expression. The despair receded, replaced by something harder, more determined. Okay, she said. Okay. We fight. We fight. Ivy moved between them, small hands finding both of theirs. Together? Caleb looked at this child, this unexpected daughter, and felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. Not the crushing weight he'd feared, but something almost bearable, almost right. Together, he confirmed. And there, in the kitchen of a house that had been dead and was slowly coming back to life, they made their stand, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with the simple, stubborn decision to not surrender. Outside, the sun continued its path across the sky. The land continued its slow cycle of growth and decay. And somewhere in Denver, Grant Ward began building his case. But here on this ranch, 3 people began building something stronger. They began building a family. The work began the next morning before sunrise. Caleb stood in the barn loft watching the house, waiting for the lamp to glow in the kitchen window. When it did, he descended and crossed the yard, entering through the back door for the first time since he'd given Elena the house. She looked up from the stove, surprise flickering across her face. You're early. We've got 30 days to turn this place into something a court can't dismiss. Early's all we've got. He poured himself coffee from the pot she'd made. I need to know everything about your finances. What James left. What you owe. What Grant can use against you. Elena's shoulders stiffened. I don't have much to tell. James died with $47 in debt. The boarding house added another $12. You settled it all when you bought, when you bid. So you're starting at 0. Less than 0. I'm starting at married to a rancher whose land barely sustains 1 person, let alone 4. She turned to face him. Caleb, We can document all we want, but the fundamental truth remains. This ranch is failing, has been for years. Grant's lawyers will tear that apart in minutes. Then we change the truth. He set down his cup. We make the ranch work, really work, show income, productivity, prove we're not just surviving but building something. How? The land's drought damaged, the cattle are gone. You have one horse and no crops worth mentioning. So we start small and build fast. Caleb's mind was already working through possibilities. We've got that south pasture that still holds water. We can run chickens, maybe goats. Low investment, quick return. I've got enough credit in town to buy starter stock. We document every purchase, every egg sold, every penny earned. Chickens and goats won't impress a judge. No, but they'll show initiative, show we're not just sitting here accepting failure. He moved to the window, looking out at his land with new eyes, seeing not what it was, but what it could be. And we fix everything that's broken. The fence, the roof, the well pump. We make this place look like a home that's cared for, not a collection of ruins held together by stubbornness. Elena was quiet for a moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. That's a lot of work for 30 days. Then we work harder than we've ever worked. He turned back to her. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm saying it's possible, if we commit to it fully. I'm 8 months pregnant, Caleb. I can't. You can manage the household accounts, document everything, keep records that show careful management, planning, forethought. You can teach Ivy her letters and numbers, show that education's happening. You can write character references, reach out to people who knew you before all this. He crossed to her. You can do what you've been doing, survive with dignity. That's more impressive than any ranch improvement I can make. Something shifted in her expression, not quite hope, but maybe determination. You really think we can do this? I think we don't have a choice, so we might as well believe we can. The sound of small feet on the stairs announced Ivy's arrival. She appeared in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and curious. Why are you here, Caleb? Because we're family now, he said simply, and families eat breakfast together. It was a small thing, a normal thing, but Ivy's face lit up like he'd offered her the world. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of relentless work. Caleb rode to town and bought 6 chickens and a rooster with money he didn't have, trusting the mercantile would extend credit based on his years of reliable payment. He bought 2 young goats from a neighboring ranch, animals that could browse the scrub and turn it into milk and eventually meat. He purchased lumber and nails and shingles and everything else needed to transform neglect into maintenance. Elena threw herself into documentation with the same fierce energy she'd brought to everything else. She created ledgers tracking every expense, every asset, every improvement. She wrote letters to the minister who'd married her to Thomas, to the teacher who'd known Ivy before Denver, to anyone who could testify to her character and capability. She taught Ivy mathematics using chicken eggs and reading using the old newspapers Caleb brought back from town. And slowly, impossibly, the ranch began to transform. The chicken coop that had stood empty for 2 years filled with noise and life. The goats cleared brush and provided milk that Elena turned into cheese, which she sold in town for small but real profit. The fence got mended, the roof got patched, the well pump got fixed properly for the first time in years. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, pushing his body past exhaustion, falling into his bedroll in the barn, too tired to think about failure or fear. But one night, 2 weeks into their 30-day countdown, Elena appeared at the barn door. You need to sleep in the house. He looked up from the harness he was mending. I'm fine here. You're not fine. You're exhausted. You're pushing too hard. She stepped into the barn, moving carefully in the dim light. We have a spare room. Ivy's room is small. You should take the larger bedroom. That's your room. It's too big for just me, and you're my husband. It's ridiculous that you're sleeping in a barn. She held up a hand before he could protest. I'm not suggesting, we're not. She stopped, frustrated. There's a bed. You need proper rest. That's all this is. Caleb studied her. This woman who'd been so fierce about maintaining boundaries, about keeping their arrangement clearly defined, now offering to share space to blur those lines. Elena, please. The word came out softer. Let me do this one thing. You've done so much. Let me give you a decent place to sleep. He couldn't argue with that. Didn't want to, if he was honest. The barn was cold, the bedroll was thin, and his body was screaming for rest. "All right," he said. "Thank you." That night he moved his few belongings into the house. The bedroom Elena had been using was indeed too large for one person. She'd divided it with a curtain hung from the ceiling beam, creating two spaces within one room. Her side held her bed and Ivy's crib that would soon hold the new baby. His side held a bed he recognized, the one he'd shared with Sarah, moved down from the attic where he'd stored it. "I hope that's okay," Elena said from the doorway. "I thought it seemed wasteful for it to just sit unused." "It's fine." His voice came out rough. "It's just a bed." But it wasn't just a bed. It was the place where Sarah had died, where he'd held her while the life bled out of her, while she'd begged him to promise he'd be okay, a promise he'd never managed to keep. Elena seemed to read something in his face. "I can move it back. I didn't think—" "Leave it." He sat on the edge of the mattress, felt the familiar give of old springs. "You're right. It's wasteful to let it sit unused, and maybe—" He stopped. Started again. "Maybe it's time to stop treating everything from before like it's sacred, like touching it will somehow dishonor her memory. Or maybe," Elena said quietly, "using things she loved honors her better than locking them away." She left him alone to settle in. Caleb lay down on Sarah's side of the bed, his side now, he supposed, and stared at the ceiling. The same ceiling he'd stared at 3 years ago, the same room. But everything was different. Sarah was gone, Elena was here, and somehow, impossibly, life was continuing. He slept better than he had in months. The 25th day arrived with a letter from Grant's lawyer. Elena read it at the kitchen table, her face carefully blank. Then she passed it to Caleb without a word. The language was legal, dense, but the message was clear. Grant was requesting a formal hearing to determine custody and living arrangements for both Ivy and the unborn child. He was claiming that Elena's marriage to Caleb was coercive, that the ranch was inadequate, that the children's welfare demanded intervention. The hearing was set for 1 week from today. 5 days left. "We're not ready," Elena said. "We've done so much, but it's not enough. He's going to walk in with lawyers and money and a house in Denver, and we're going to counter with chickens and a patched roof." "We're going to counter with truth," Caleb set down the letter. "With evidence that you're a capable mother in a stable home with support and resources. That's what matters." "To who? To you? To me?" Elena's voice rose. "The judge is going to see what he sees, a pregnant woman in the middle of nowhere with a man she barely knows. All our documentation, all our work, it's not going to change the fundamental optics. Then we change what he sees." Caleb stood, pacing the small kitchen. "We bring people to testify. Doc Reynolds can speak to your health, to the preparations we've made for the birth. Sheriff Morrison can speak to the legality of the marriage. We can bring the mercantile owner to show our credit, our payments, our reliability. And Grant will bring character witnesses who'll say I'm unfit, who'll say I abandoned propriety by marrying so quickly, who'll say—" Her voice broke. "Who'll say what everyone in this town already thinks, that I sold myself for security." The words hung between them, ugly and honest. Caleb crossed to her, knelt beside her chair. "Look at me." He waited until her eyes met his. "I don't care what this town thinks. I don't care what Grant Ward thinks. The only opinions that matter are yours, mine, and Ivy's. Do you feel secure here?" "Yes." "Do you feel respected?" "Yes." "Do you regret marrying me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No. I thought I would. I thought it would feel like being owned again, but it doesn't. It feels like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like having an ally. Someone on my side for once." "Then that's what we tell the judge. Not through witnesses or documentation, though we'll bring those too, but through the simple truth that this arrangement works, that we chose it freely and we're making it succeed." He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her face without thinking. The gesture was intimate, automatic, and they both froze when they realized it. His hand dropped. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay." Elena caught his hand before he could pull away completely. "Caleb, I need to tell you something about the baby. His heart stopped. Is something wrong? No, nothing wrong. But I need you to understand. When it comes, when I'm in labor, I'm going to be scared. Not of the pain, but of the outcome. I lost a baby between Thomas and Ivy. Lost 3 more before I married James. This one, her hand moved to her belly. This one stayed. This one's fighting, but I'm terrified that when the moment comes, my body will fail again. Doc Reynolds will be here. He promised. I know, but I need more than a doctor. I need... She stopped, struggling. I need someone who'll stay, who won't leave if things get bad, who won't give up on me. The weight of what she was asking settled on his shoulders. She was asking him to witness her most vulnerable moment, to see her at her weakest, to stay when staying was hard. She was asking him to do for her what he'd failed to do for Sarah. I'll stay, he said. No matter what happens, Elena, I'll stay. Her eyes searched his face. Promise me. I promise. She nodded, released his hand, and turned back to the letter. Then we have 5 days to prepare. We'd better not waste them. The days raced by in a blur of final preparations. Caleb rode to neighboring ranches, asking for character references. Found 3 ranchers willing to testify that he was reliable, honest, and capable despite his isolation. Elena finished her documentation, creating a portfolio that showed careful household management and planning. Doc Reynolds arrived on the 28th day, true to his word, and set up in the small room off the kitchen. And on the 29th day, Elena went into labor. It started just after dawn. Caleb was feeding the chickens when he heard her call his name. Not panicked, but urgent. He dropped everything and ran to the house. She was standing in the kitchen, one hand braced on the table, the other pressed to her belly. It's time. You're sure? I've done this before. I'm sure. Another contraction hit. She breathed through it the way he'd taught her months ago. Get Doc Reynolds. And Caleb? She grabbed his arm. Remember your promise. I remember. The hours that followed were the longest of Caleb's life. Longer than waiting for Sarah to die. Longer than the auction. Longer than any night he'd spent alone in the barn convincing himself that isolation was survivable. Doc Reynolds examined Elena, declared things progressing normally, and settled in for the wait. Caleb stayed in the room despite the doctor's suggestion that he might prefer to wait elsewhere. He'd promised to stay. He'd stay. Ivy sat on the porch, too young to fully understand, but old enough to know something momentous was happening. Caleb checked on her between contractions, making sure she wasn't too frightened. Is Mama going to be okay? Ivy asked. Yes. How do you know? Because she's the strongest person I've ever met, and because Doc Reynolds is here, and because I'm not going to let anything happen to her. It was a promise he had no right to make. Childbirth didn't care about promises, but he made it anyway. The labor intensified as the sun climbed higher. Elena's careful control began to fracture. She cried out, gripped Caleb's hand hard enough to leave marks, begged for it to be over, then apologized for being weak, then cried again when another wave hit. You're not weak, Caleb told her. You're doing exactly what you need to do. I can't. You can. You are. Doc Reynolds moved between examinations and encouragement, his old hand steady, his voice calm. Almost there, Elena. The baby's crowning. Next contraction, you push with everything you have. Caleb positioned himself behind her, supporting her weight, letting her lean into him. She was drenched in sweat, trembling with exhaustion, but when the next contraction came, she bore down with a strength that took his breath away. And then, impossible and perfect, a baby's cry filled the room. It's a boy, Doc Reynolds announced, holding up a small, angry, beautiful life. A healthy boy. Elena sobbed, reaching for her son. The doctor placed him on her chest, still attached by the cord, and she held him like he was made of starlight and miracles. He's here, she whispered. He's really here. Caleb felt something in his chest crack open. Not the familiar crack of loss, but something different, something that felt dangerously like joy. Doc Reynolds worked quickly, efficiently, cutting the cord and cleaning the baby while Elena delivered the afterbirth. The doctor's face was professionally neutral, but Caleb saw the tension in his shoulders. Elena, you're bleeding more than I'd like. Not dangerous yet, but I need to manage it. Caleb, keep her talking. Keep her present. Fear crashed over him. Not this. Not again. He'd promised to stay, but he'd also promised Sarah everything would be fine, and it hadn't been. And, Caleb, Elena's voice cut through his spiral. I need you here. Now. He focused on her face, on her eyes, tired but alive, on the baby in her arms crying lustily, on the present moment, not the ghosts of the past. I'm here. Tell me about the ranch, about what we'll do when this is over. His voice caught. He tried again. We'll finish the fence, get more chickens, maybe some proper cattle come spring. We'll expand the garden, teach Ivy to ride. Teach this little one too, when he's big enough. What should we name him? Elena's voice was getting weaker. Elena, stay with me. Doc Reynolds' voice was sharp. I need you to stay present. I am present. I'm just tired. She looked down at her son. Thomas? We'll name him Thomas, after Ivy's father, after the good man who started this. Thomas, Caleb repeated. It's a strong name. The bleeding slowed. Doc Reynolds worked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of 4 decades of medicine. Finally, he sat back. You're going to be fine, Elena, but you need rest, a lot of rest. No getting up, no activity, just healing. Understand? I understand. The doctor looked at Caleb. She means it when she says rest. I know she's stubborn. Don't let her be. I'll make sure, Caleb said. Doc Reynolds cleaned up and left them alone with their new son. Elena held Thomas, counting his fingers, his toes, marveling at each small, perfect detail. Caleb sat beside the bed, watching them both, feeling the weight and wonder of what had just happened. You stayed, Elena said softly. I promised I would. Sarah was lucky to have you. The words should have hurt. Instead, they felt like absolution. I'm lucky to have you. Caleb didn't trust his voice. He just nodded. Ivy crept into the room, eyes wide. Mama, is that my brother? Come meet him, sweetheart. Ivy climbed carefully onto the bed, stared at the small, scrunched face, and smiled. He's tiny. You were tiny once, too. Can I hold him? Elena helped position Thomas in Ivy's arms, supporting his head. The girl held her brother with such careful reverence that Caleb felt his eyes burn. This was what family looked like. Not perfection, not the fairy tale, just people loving each other as carefully as they could, building something precious out of broken pieces. The hearing was the next day. They'd lost an entire day to the birth, had no time to prepare further. But when Caleb rode to town to inform the judge of the situation, carrying Doc Reynolds' medical documentation, something unexpected happened. Grant Ward withdrew his petition. Judge Hartwell delivered the news himself, riding out to the ranch that evening. He found them in the kitchen, Elena in bed visible through the open door, Ivy reading quietly beside her, Thomas sleeping in the cradle Caleb had hastily built, and Caleb himself sitting at the table looking like a man who'd survived a battle. Mr. Ward has withdrawn his custody claim, Hartwell announced without preamble. Apparently, Doc Reynolds sent him a rather strongly worded letter about the successful delivery and the stable home environment. Several other town residents added their own testimonials. The weight of evidence became insurmountable. So it's over? Elena's voice came from the bedroom. It's over. The marriage stands, the children remain with you, and Mr. Ward has agreed to cease all further legal action. Hartwell pulled out an envelope. He also sent this. Said you'd understand what it means. Elena opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a bank draft for $500 and a brief note. Caleb read it over her shoulder. For the child's welfare, consider all family debt settled. GW. He's buying his conscience, Elena said bitterly. He's admitting defeat, Hartwell corrected, and providing resources that will help establish this ranch on solid footing. I'd suggest you take it. We'll take it, Caleb said, and we'll use it to build something worth having. After the judge left, they sat in silence. The enormity of what they'd accomplished settled over them like snow, quiet, transformative, permanent. We did it, Elena whispered. We actually did it. You did it. You fought for your children and won. We fought together. She looked at him. That was the difference, Caleb. Not the documentation or the ranch improvements or any of it. The difference was that I wasn't alone anymore. Ivy appeared in the doorway, holding a piece of paper. I made something. She held it up. A drawing, done in careful crayon. 4 figures holding hands, a tall man, a woman, a small girl, and a tiny baby. Above them, in Ivy's careful letters, one word: home. It's us, Ivy explained unnecessarily. Our family. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Caleb felt his throat tighten. It's perfect, sweetheart, Elena said. Absolutely perfect. That night, after Ivy had gone to bed, and Thomas was sleeping and Elena was finally resting properly, Caleb sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The ranch was quiet except for the normal sounds. Chickens settling, goats browsing, the wind through the grass. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a man waiting to die. Alone, broken, convinced that the best he could do was endure until endurance was no longer required. Now he was a husband, a father, in all the ways that mattered, if not biology. A man with people depending on him, trusting him, choosing to stay with him, not out of desperation, but out of something that might, given time, become love. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. The door opened behind him. Elena emerged, moving slowly, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. She shouldn't be up, but Caleb had learned when to fight her stubbornness and when to accept it. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to. She sat carefully beside him. I wanted to be here, with you, watching our home be peaceful. Our home. Not his, not hers, ours. I never thanked you properly, Elena said, for what you did in that town square, for buying us, for giving us this chance. You've thanked me a dozen times. I know, but I need to say it again. You didn't save us, Caleb. You were right about that. But you gave us the space to save ourselves. You stood between us and the cruelty long enough for us to get our feet under us. That's worth more than gratitude. That's worth everything. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders nearly touching. Then Elena spoke again, her voice tentative. I know our arrangement was supposed to be practical. Partnership, protection, mutual benefit. And I'm not trying to complicate that or ask for more than we agreed to, but I need you to know, she paused, this hasn't felt practical for a while now. It's felt real. And I think maybe, if we're willing, it could become something even better than we planned. Caleb turned to look at her. At this woman who'd somehow slipped past every wall he'd built, who'd transformed his dead house into a home, who'd given him reason to wake up in the morning and purpose beyond mere survival. I think, he said carefully, it already has become something better. I just didn't want to presume, didn't want to ask for more than you were ready to give. What if I'm ready now? Then we take our time. We do this right. We build on what's already here instead of forcing something that isn't. He reached for her hand, held it gently. I failed Sarah by not being enough. I won't fail you by rushing into something neither of us is ready for. You didn't fail Sarah. Life failed you both. There's a difference. Maybe, he squeezed her hand, but either way, we go slow. We let this grow at its own pace, and whatever it becomes, we choose it together. Together, Elena agreed. They sat there as the stars multiplied overhead, as the night deepened around them, as their ranch breathed quietly in the darkness. Inside, their children slept. Ivy dreaming of horses and family, Thomas too new to dream of anything except warmth and safety. 2 broken people had become 4 whole ones, not through magic or miracle, but through the simple act of showing up. Of staying when leaving would have been easier, of choosing each other day after impossible day. The town would continue to whisper. Winter would come and test them. The ranch would demand constant work. The children would need care and guidance. Life would be hard in all the ordinary ways life always was, but they wouldn't face it alone. Caleb looked at Elena, at the mother of his children, at the partner who'd chosen to stay. We should go inside. You need rest. In a minute, she leaned her head on his shoulder. Let me have one more minute out here, being grateful. So he sat with her, holding her hand, watching their home exist peacefully in the darkness. And for the first time since Sarah died, Caleb let himself believe that maybe the future held more than just endurance. Maybe it held joy. Maybe it held love. Maybe it held all the quiet, ordinary miracles that came from choosing to stay when no one was watching. When there were no witnesses to judge or applaud, when it was just two people facing the world together, building something precious out of the wreckage they'd been given. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. And on a broken ranch 12 miles from nowhere, a family settled into the business of being, not perfect, not easy, but real. And that, Caleb realized, was more than enough. It was everything.